Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Baker Institute's Latin America Initiative and Center for Energy Studies, I'd like to welcome you to this timely discussion on opening Mexico's energy sector to new international competition. Energy reform is a critical issue in Mexico, one that raises conflicting questions on sovereignty and economic growth for the nation. Since 1938, Mexico has had a state-led oil sector with exploration, extraction, and downstream industries completely under the control of Pemex, the national oil company. A significant proportion of government revenues has traditionally come from Pemex, accounting today for 34% of the federal budget. However, in the past few years, declining output and aging energy infrastructure, driven by a technical and economic inability to exploit deep water oil and shale gas, has reduced profits and threatened the survival of Pemex. Today, this reality seems to have aligned with the political conditions necessary to carry out energy reforms that would allow foreign companies to partner with Pemex and develop Mexico's untapped resources. We are honored to have with us former chairman of the Mexican Federal Competition Commission, Eduardo Pérez Motta, to shed light on the road ahead. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, McDermott, Will & Emery, LLP, and Rice University's Jones School of Business. I'd especially like to thank Alan Van Fleet, a partner of McDermott, Will & Emery, and an adjunct professor of management here at the Jones School, whose expertise and foresight have made this important event possible. Before I pass it on to Alan, who will introduce Mr. Pérez Motta, I'd like to briefly share some exciting news. After years of strong commitment to fostering a deeper understanding of U.S.-Mexico relations and capitalizing on Texas' rich bond with our neighbor to the south, the Baker Institute has recently created the Mexico Center. Energy, as well as trade and infrastructure, among others, are the core issues of the center's research agenda, and tonight's conversation is a perfect complement to our new initiative. Please stay tuned for the formal inauguration of the center next spring and for an upcoming half-day conference sponsored by the center and other partners on Mexico's energy reform that will take place on the morning of October 31st. Alan?
Thank you, Erica, and thank you all for coming tonight. I am delighted to introduce you to Eduardo Pérez Motta. Eduardo and I first met over dinner in spring of 2004 in Miami at a meeting of the leadership of the ABA section of antitrust law. He had just been nominated to head Mexico's Federal Competition Commission. And I have to say, there were many of us in the competition community who weren't so sure about this appointment. You see, Eduardo had come from the international trade side. He had been a negotiator for Mexico to the World Trade Organization and had spent much of his career with Mexico's department, SECOFI, the Department of Trade. And you know, even in this country, folks on the international trade side, our International Trade Commission, our WTO, essentially are out there not necessarily promoting international competition with our domestic industries, with our domestic companies, but instead looking to promote American interest abroad. And so we had this notion that maybe this new guy, Pérez Motta, wasn't interested so much in exposing Mexico's domestic industries to international competition, but might be out there to promote national champions against international competitors. But Dios mío, were we so wrong. I mean, he proved to be an aggressive and efficient and effective enforcer of Mexico's still fairly new federal law of economic competition, and his willingness to go after really big players like Carlos Slim and his Telmex empire, imposing at one time a fine of $1 billion US, that's B with a billion and a US dollars, not pesos, gained him the attention and the respect of his peers from around the world, such that in 2012 they elected him to head the International Competition Network, which comprises the enforcement heads of competition agencies from around the world, now numbering over 100. and where he found Mexico's new law lacking in the tools needed to go after these big, formerly state-run monopolies, he set out to reform the laws. There were very significant reforms in 2011, and even more so very recently, that just became effective. And in fact, he was so effective in so reforming Mexico's law that he reformed himself out of a job, and now we have an entirely new commission with a newly reconstituted, constitutionally independent body that is even more independent from government political forces than our own Federal Trade Commission, let alone our Department of Justice. He is, while he was head of the competition agency, he went after Pemex and its affiliated companies to the best that one could under the constitutional and regulatory structure of Mexico that exists today. And now he's going to come talk to us free of any constraints of being a governmental officer, to give us his views about where Mexico may be going and where it should be going in the energy sector, and is it finally willing to open up to international competition. Let me say one note how we all came to be here tonight. This year, for the first time, I was teaching over at the Jones School a course called Antitrust for Business Managers, and one thing I was able to do was bring some guest speakers, some guest activities such as FBI agents, which busted our class, which seemed too willing to fix the prices of a hypothetical rice coffee shops. And but when word got out that Eduardo was coming to talk to one of my classes, first the Jones School said, "Oh no, you must share him with the whole school." And then the Baker Institute says, "Oh no, you must share him with us as well." But following Eduardo's talk tonight, immediately across the plaza, in our classroom on the third floor, 371, Eduardo has agreed that he will talk one-on-one with our students, but I'm sure he'd be delighted if any of you would like, after a question and answer session here, if you'd like to talk with him, particularly about competition law and its role in Mexico, please feel free to join us. And with that, I give you my wonderful colleague and very good friend, Eduardo Pérez Motta.
Well, thank you very much, Erika. Thank you very much for your words, and Alan, you're a very good friend. I think you might be a little bit biased because we are good friends, but thank you very much for your very kind introduction. You were saying, Alan, that I will speak free of constraint, being now starting a new life after many years in the government, not only the last 9 years in the Competition Authority, but maybe which is true. I mean, I will have less constraints now. But what is also true is that during my nine years in the Competition Authority, one of the concerns that many people had in Mexico, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and in the private sector as well, is that I was always speaking too freely, too getting behind of many constraints. But so this is not going to be a big difference for me anyway. So I'm very happy to be here at Rice University, and I would like to thank the Baker Institute for inviting me for this meeting, and I would like to thank Matt Dermont, Will and Emery, which is the law firm where Alan works, for inviting me to be here. I'm very, very happy. It's for me a privilege to be here. And let me tell you that this is going to be my first open conference to talk on a specific sector since I left the Competition Authority 15 days ago. So Before I start sharing with you some reflections on the Mexican energy reform, let me just give you the context of how we can, or how we should see the Mexican energy reform. Well, so what is, the Mexican energy reform is part of a broader, very important strategy to make different structural reforms in Mexico. But the origin of all the problems and the reasons why Mexico is moving in this group of reforms is a very clear and a very sad diagnostic about the Mexican economy. Since if you look at the growth rate of the Mexican economy since the beginning of the 60s up to today, Mexico is frankly growing in a very mediocre way. We are not growing enough. We are not generating opportunities so that many more Mexicans have the possibility to work. And not only the fact of having the possibility to work, but the fact of being part of the Mexican market. So to work means the capacity to generate income, but the capacity to generate income gives the opportunity to participate in the market as a consumer as well. So when you look at the Mexican market, we are about 130 million people. And from those 130 million people, more than half of them are really poor people. People who do not have real access to the Mexican market. So the Mexican economy is a very small economy. Even though that when you compare the Mexican economy with all other Latin American economies, we look relatively big. And I say relatively, we are still, we have a much greater trade relationship with the world than Brazil, for instance, even though that Brazil is much bigger than our economy. But in any case, what we have is a relatively small group of Mexicans. I mean, there are many millions anyway, but we have the possibility to have a much greater market than the one that we have. And the question is how we can do it, how we can increase our economy. Many of you are economists, and in this very good university, you must have learned that in order to grow, you have to accumulate more assets. You have to increase the amount of assets. Like in any company, you have to increase the amount of your assets to become greater, to increase your capacity to grow. And what are the assets of any economy? Well, capital. Capital is the only asset, human or physical. And to increase the human capital, you have to increase population, you have to have young people, you have to invest in education, you have to invest in social security, you have to open opportunities of your society, you have to invest physically, you have to have more plants, you have to have more gadgets in your plants, more machines to have a greater economy. That's very clear. And when you compare the Mexican economy with the US economy, the Mexican economy is growing in terms of its assets at a faster way than the US economy. That is not the problem. The main problem that I see as an economist in Mexico is not the lack of resources, is the lack of efficiency. So we have more assets, we have more resources, but we are not using those resources efficiently. So we can grow faster if we use those resources in a more efficient way. So that's the diagnostic as easy as that, frankly speaking. Now, what do you have to do? What do you have to do in order to be more efficient? That's the main question. If you use the market as the main source of efficiency and growth, the best way to use the engine of the market is through a competitive environment, through competition, to make business people to compete among themselves in order to gain a greater share of the market. And the only way to do it in a competitive market, in a market that is open to competitors, is to do your activities in a more efficient way. There is no other option. You cannot make mistakes, because if you make a mistake, you are going to lose part of the market. You have to make a good investment, to have a good technology, to innovate. You have to have good services. You have to have good products, good quality of products. And when you add that action in all the business people in your economy, that means efficiency, market efficiency for all. So the question is how you can introduce competition in a market economy like the Mexican economy. I think this is the main question. In a country that is not accustomed to use the market, frankly speaking, people do not understand why the market generates benefit for themselves in the Mexican economy, in the Mexican community. So that's the main question. And there are basically two lines, two possibilities to generate more competition. One comes from what we call as competition officials. Well, sorry for saying we, because I am not a competition official anymore, but what competition officials call enforcement, which is to be sure that the private agents, the companies, work competitively in a competitive environment. So they do not displace illegally their competitors. They do not abuse the dominant position if they have a dominant position, or that they do not organize cartels, which is a way to avoid competition. Fixing prices, dividing the markets, participating organizing bid rigging, participating in auctions in the marketplace with the government or in the private sector. So you have to avoid that through actions by the competition authority. That's one. And Mexico has been reforming its competition law since 2006. And I can tell you that today we have a competition law and a competition authority that goes in line with best international practices. We have the best instruments that you can have any place in the world in Mexico. There are some risks still, because if there is a reform of the Mexican law, there will be a lot of pressures to go back and to eliminate some of the positive instruments that the authority has. But this is one of the elements. And the second element, and I will, after the second element, I will start with energy, is the regulatory environment on regulated sectors. What are those regulated sectors? Basically, transport, telecoms, financial services, and energy. And if you look at those sectors, they have one element which is a common element in those four sectors, which is the fact that each of those sectors is based on economies of networks. In the financial sector is a network. The players is a collection of networks. Different banks have a network of different offices in different parts of the country. They have a network in ATMs and so on. So it's a network. Telecoms is another network. You could be in a network of a cable provider. You can be in a specific network of a mobile telephone provider. And networks call among themselves. They touch. I mean, if you are in one mobile provider and you want to call to a friend that is with another provider, you have to be able to contact him. You have to be able to connect networks. Same thing in the energy sector, and the same thing in the transport sector. So the element that is in common, which is network, that the economics of networks basically mean that the minimum size of the network is going to be relatively big in order to be efficient. So you are going to have few players. And if you look at those sectors, you have few players. In airlines, you have few players. In maritime transport, you have very few players. In telecoms, triple play, you have very few players. You have very few players as well in the energy sector. So the question for the governments is always how to regulate those sectors, how to regulate them in such a way that they are the most efficient they could be. They compete as much as they can, even though that they are very few economic agents in any of those sectors. And the question is how you do it. In Mexico, we have problems in these two areas, or we have had problems in enforcement, and we have had lots of problems in designing the regulatory framework in all those regulated sectors. Since the new administration entered, what happened is that the new administration decided to organize a cartel, let's say it that way, which is called the Pacto for Mexico. So they got together the three biggest parties, and they said, let's start moving this economy. So let's start redesigning the regulatory framework of telecom. They did it already at the constitutional level. They need to go to the secondary law, which is going to be very important. We have to understand that the secondary laws are as important as the reforms of the Constitution. But it has, at the constitutional level, has already been done. There is a major reform of the financial sector that is in the Mexican Congress today. And there is a major reform that could take place in the energy sector. So we only have transport as a missing sector there. And there was also a reform in the competition law. The competition authority is completely autonomous, and they have additional instruments like access to essential regulation to access to essential facilities, which is very important there. Now, so given said all this, and I'm not going to go into the details in telecoms, in the financial sectors, even though that those reforms go very much in line of what the competition authority has been proposing, advocating in the last 9 years. And this is something you could say, well, this guy is saying this because the reform is already in place. He wants to put the star here and say that no. It is already published. All the opinions of the Mexican Competition Authority are public. They are in the website, and the data where they were published is there. Since 2005, we have been advocating for all of this, and this is already written. So I think there is a good advance, and we could have good expectations on that. So let me move now to the energy reform. So the logics of the energy reform is how we can make our energy sector, the energy sector in the Mexican economy, more efficient. That's the whole question. Same question in telecoms, same question in the financial sector. let me see how I can. I don't know if or Erika, is there someone, or how can I just, sorry, thank you. Here. Okay, we will start. We will. Let me divide this analysis on the energy reform in three basic areas. First, why the Mexican energy reform? Why this reform opens the possibility to have a really efficient sector in Mexico, and why this is so important. We have already said some things about the importance of regulated sectors and how they are the source of competitiveness. This is crucial. If we have an efficient telecoms, financial sector, telecom, transport, and energy, we are going to have a platform of productivity that is going to be able to produce efficiency in all the other sectors that are users of these sectors. This is a very important element that makes those four sectors different to any other sector. Because if you look at yourself, I mean, you are a user of any one of you are an important user of all those four sectors. You all use transport, you all use telecoms, you all use energy, all of you use the financial sector. So this is true for the whole economy. So that's the first part. The second part is that, and this is a crucial message that I would like to share with you. This is obvious, but I don't think we could avoid emphasizing this element. The reform in the energy sector, if it's going to be meaningful, will have to start in the Constitution. But it's not going to end there. Even if we have a very good constitutional reform, the devil is going to be in the details, which is the problem could be here, in the secondary reform. This is one of the most important. You would say, well, this is obvious. Yes, it is obvious. But we have to repeat it once and again. We have to be very careful on the secondary law. The secondary law is going to make the difference if the reform is good or not. So the reform of the Constitution is a necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition to have an efficient energy sector. And third, this is also a crucial element. If there is one word that has to be a constant, a word that is going to be, that has to be repeated all the time, is the word competition. The difference between the energy sector after the reform vis-a-vis the energy sector before this reform has to be competition. Competition in the energy sector has to be the main difference. Because if there is competition there is going to be efficiency. And all the other players in the Mexican economy are going to benefit from that efficiency. And let's look at the Mexican Constitution. Just briefly. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details, and don't worry, I am not, as Alan, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, so I'm not going to put, of course, it is very important to put emphasis in the legal details, but I'm not going to go into those details now. But the Mexican Constitution is quite, I would say, respectfully, as some political players used to say in Mexico, what I would say respectfully is very funny, the Mexican Constitution, because it says, on one side, Article 28 says, monopolies in Mexico are prohibited. And the government has to be very tough against monopolies. And it uses the Mexican competition law, the Mexican constitution in the area of competition, which is Article 28, uses words which are stronger than many other articles in the rest of the constitution in Mexico. But even though that it says monopolies are prohibited, at the same time, it says that in the energy sector, monopolies do not even exist. There are no monopolies. Even though there is only one company, that is the only company that can extract and can exploit petroleum. And there is only one company that can distribute energy, electricity. They cannot be even called monopolies. That's very strange. But that's what the competition says. So we have to start there, frankly speaking. We have to start with Article 28 of our competition, opening competition to all sectors. This is crucial. Now, the proposals that are in the table are basically three proposals. And I will order them according to their level of ambition in terms of competition. I mean, it's just a coincidence that we will be moving from your left to your right. But it is a reality. Actually, the party that is on the left side, which is the PRD, is basically proposing no changes to competition, no changes to constitution. Even though that the Constitution says what I just said before, this party says the energy sector in Mexico could be reformed without touching the Constitution. This could be like magics, like black magic, but this is what they say. I respectfully say just what they say. So this is one side. And the other side is the PAN, which is the National Action Party, that basically, of course, says you need, in order to increase market efficiency in the energy sector in Mexico, you need to change the Constitution. And the position in the middle, which is the PRI, which is the party in the government today, says the same thing in those terms. They say the Constitution has to be changed. So that's one point. Second point has to do with private participation. That does not mean necessarily privatization of Pemex. It means private parties, economic agents, which are not governmental agencies, could participate in the energy sector. That's only what it means. So the party that is on your left side basically says no participation of any other party. You don't need that. Let's stay with Pemex, and let's stay with the electricity company, CFE, and that's it. The other two parties on your right side basically say all markets should be open to private participation. So in that part, the two parties on your right, PRI and PAN, basically go in line in those general principles. Third, the third element is how you do it. What's the mode to change, to do those changes, to reach a reform and to promote private participation? Basically, the PRD says no, there is no way, because they don't think it is necessary. The National Action Party, the party on your right side, basically says the only way to do this, which means the only way to allow private participation in all markets, has to be through concessions. So give concessions to private companies to participate in all those markets in the energy sector. That's what they say. And the PRI says, yes, you can do it, but use state contracts with profit sharing. That's the one that is in the middle. And there are, of course, additional disciplines. The PRD and the National Action Party basically both introduce the possibility to have independent regulators, an independent regulator to basically apply the law, which is, I think, that would be fine, that would be interesting. And the PRD basically assumes that the way to modernize the energy sector in Mexico would be to give more resources to the government-owned monopoly, which is Pemex. So that's basically, in very few words, those are the three proposals. Now, we are very early in the process. This is being discussed by the Congress, so we don't know what is going to be the final result of this discussion. At least I don't know it. But in my opinion, the final decision would go on this part of the game, in this area. Okay, it could even more a little bit closer to the National Action Party, because if you need to reform the Constitution, the PRI does not have enough numbers in the Congress to reform the Constitution. So it would need either the votes of the PRD or the votes of the National Action Party. If you are not going to get the PRD, because it is going to be impossible to have this party in this game with these rules, the only way to have the National Action Party going together with the PRI, in my way, would be if these guys move to the side, or if they convince basically to accept this proposal. So the most likely outcome would be to get closer to the PRI proposal. I can tell you that from a basic economic analysis, not doing any political analysis here, but just analyzing, putting just the economics in this discussion, in order to move to a more efficient energy sector, you have to move closer to concessions, because that's what gives legal certainty to private players there. This is a sector, the energy sector, and this is very obvious, but the energy sector is a sector where you have to risk a lot when you put money there. You don't know exactly what's going to be the end result. Just look at what is happening now with shale gas. I mean, this is changing the whole rules of this game, the whole future set of prices of the different sets of products of the energy sector. So you can invest today to exploit, to find a well, and to exploit that well, and maybe when you get those products, that oil, the relative prices are completely different of what you calculated when you invested and when you made all the analysis to see the availability, the feasibility of that oil. So it is a very risky business, obviously. So if you don't have the right to put those reserves in your papers, how you are going to put money there? It's not clear. But in the end, in this proposal, with the state contracts, well, it will depend on how you design, basically, the contract. and how you go into the secondary law. And let me move to that issue, which is precisely what I was saying here when I was telling you, well, the devil is in the details. This is true everywhere, but here it is very clear. Unless we know the final outcome of the secondary law, let's assume that the highest possibility is to have an outcome that goes very much in line with the PRI proposal. So you have something similar, some way similar to a contract with a kind of sharing profits. And they convince the National Action Party people that in the secondary law they will have a very clear way to share those profits and so on. In the end, everything, most of the outcome is going to depend on how you design the secondary law. So the first point that I would like to share with you is something that is very obvious, but I think it is very important. The most simple things are sometimes the most difficult things to understand in this type of games. And you have to go all the time to those basic concepts if you want to be sure that you have a good outcome. You have to put a lot of attention of what you have in the secondary law. And let me tell you that from my experience in these years in the competition authority, even though having a relatively clear secondary law, you have some abuses in this market. When you have such a dominant player like Pemex, you have many cases which, frankly speaking, shouldn't be taking place or shouldn't be happening in this market. Because even in the areas where Pemex does not have the faculty in the law, in the secondary law, or even in the Constitution, they are, in my view, and this has been the view of the competition authority in some recent decisions, it is abusing its market dominance or its market power. One case is this one here, where Pemex has been using its power to basically displacing competitors in the distribution of gasoline. So basically, gasoline concessionaries, once they get the gasoline from the tank that is a Pemex tank, they have the obligation to buy that gasoline from Pemex. That's the only possibility they have. That's clear. But once they buy it, once they put that gasoline in their own trucks, they should be able to transport that gasoline to their gas stations. Well, Pemex was not allowed some of them to do it, and recently decided not to do it, to move that gasoline with their own trucks, with its own union. And the competition authority said, we are going to impose Pemex a very high sanction because that's an abuse of dominance. But that's an example. That's an example of a case of abusing if you speak with Pemex, they would say, no, these guys from the competition authority have not read the law. I have the right to do it, even though that I have given some possibilities to some gas station concessionaries to do it. I am the only one to do it. And these guys don't know how to read the law. That's what they will say. I have another view of that. And that's precisely what we decided to impose that very high sanction to Pemex. And I was personally advocating for a much higher sanction, frankly speaking, but in the end, it was a relatively high sanction. But let me give you another area, gas. Basically, the gas pipelines. What Pemex is doing Instead, the possibility to invest and to have pipelines is open to the private sector today, with the law today. Well, basically, what you have is Pemex co-investing with private parties in that sector. Basically, Pemex does not allow the private parties to invest and to put their own money in those pipelines. That's a big problem. With there are many other examples. The case of distribution of that's some kind of oil in what you use as the oil that you use in your cars, in gas stations. Pemex was basically distributing its own brand that has with another private company, and not allowing other private players to be able to sell their products in gas stations in Mexico. That was another case. The competition authority enforced or sanctioned Pemex, and was a case that has been a case in the tribunals for many years. So there are many cases. So this is why the secondary law is so important. Even with relatively clear secondary law, there are abuses in this market. So we have to avoid that. We have to give legal certainty, economic certainty to the new players in this game. This is very important, because the real effect and the real effects of this reform will be basically introducing, as I said at the beginning, introducing the word competition in this sector. If you do that, you are going to have lower prices, you will have greater production, you will have much greater investment, a very important increase in the amount of the investment in this sector. So you are going to benefit the whole economy. But you have to have clear competition disciplines. So you can lose your opportunity. You can lose your opportunity to have a very good reform. You can lose the opportunity and continue to have dominance by Pemex. You could have state intervention in favor of Pemex, and you could have, in the end, you can continue the stagnation of this sector, or you can move to a successful reform with Pemex being a strong player. That's not a problem. Nobody is against Pemex. It's just against inefficiency. So Pemex being efficient, it could be big. What's the problem? As long as it can compete. You can have a successful reform if you have clear rules which apply in a non-discriminatory way to all market participants. This is very important. So the market field, the playing field has to be leveled, and you can have, as a final result, a vibrant competitive market in a vibrant competitive energy sector that could benefit not only economic players in that sector, but also many Mexicans that are companies and persons that are users of energy in general. So in order to do that, you have to, what you're going to have at the end is a sector with three important players: the state, Pemex, and private participants. So in this triangle, you have to set competitive rules that define the relationship of all of them. Go to this one here. The relationship between the state, the Mexican state, and Pemex, in my view, has to be defined by a very important concept, which is competitive neutrality. What is the meaning of competitive neutrality? You have to treat Pemex the same way you treat the other participants. That has to be clear. The second rule, or the second area where competition has to be the rule, is the relationship between the Mexican state and the private participants. This one here. What is what you need? Basically, what you need is that relationship between the private participants and the state has to be direct. It shouldn't go through Pemex. This is the most important point. Because if it goes through Pemex, then Pemex will always have the incentives, because he's going to be playing, or he's going to be speaking with its own competitors. There should be someone outside that has to be the referee, or that has to be the regulator. That's why I like both positions from PRD on one side and the National Action Party that say there has to be a regulator here. Yes, because that's the one that has to speak with the private directly with the private participants. And not even the state in terms of the political state, because this issue shouldn't be political, it has to be technical. This is very important. So that's the second relationship that has to be clear in terms of competition. The third one is this one. The relationship between the market state, the Mexican state, and the two players, which are the private new players and Pemex. So the role of the state there has to be to minimize the barriers of entry. So even if you have new players here, they shouldn't be sure that they are going to be the only ones. This market should be always open to other new private players. And that rule has to be defined here by the Mexican state. And finally, this relationship, that is not an easy relationship, between Pemex in the same market, Pemex and the new players. Here you will have to deal with history, you will have to deal with very difficult historical issues in this part. And this is the role for the new competition authority. This has to be in the hands of the new competition authority. Especially that the new competition authority is completely autonomous, completely independent as the Mexican Central Bank, as the Federal Reserve here in the US. And frankly speaking, with all my respect, as is said by the Mexican politicians, or by a Mexican politician, one of them only, we are even more advanced than the US in this side. Because now the Mexican Competition Authority is more independent than the Federal Trade Commission. And when I say this here, I say that I have said the same thing to my friends in the Federal Trade Commission. They would like to have that status. They are very independent anyway. Frankly speaking, the design of the institution makes the Federal Trade Commission very independent, and it has been working independently since its inception. So those are the four elements. If you have very well pro-competitive defined these four elements, if you define them in a pro-competitive way, I can assure you that the reform is going to be a successful reform. And let me just go with some details here, just in each one of those connections. Let me go to the first one, the one between the Mexican state, the one between the Mexican state and Pemex and the new players. Okay? Why do we need to have this connection be very clear? You have to define a regulatory pro-competitive elements, as I said, to minimize barriers of entry. And it's very important because here, what you are doing here is basically, this is done basically through regulation, ex ante. It's an ex ante regulation. The other relationship, which goes very much in line of competition, is this one, as I said, between Pemex and the players, and that has to be enforcement. That has to be through the competition authority. So there are two ways to promote competition there, as I said at the very beginning. One is through a regulatory design, and the other is through enforcement. Okay, so this one is the one that goes on the regulatory design. So why? Because it is necessary to minimize very important structural elements in this market, minimize the barriers of entry. And how you are going to do it? Well, you have to define unbiased rules for the contracts. If the contract approach is the one that is going to be moved ahead, you need to import open discipline to the domestic markets. That is, you have to have an open door to any other new players to come at any moment. See, this is crucial. And you have to have a very efficient mix between between the tax and royalty regime to increase investment. Because obviously, you have to collect part of the rents of this market. This is crucial. I mean, this happens in the US, this happens in Europe, this happens everywhere. You have to collect, because this market gets rents, economic rents. And part of those rents, they have to be collected by the government. The question is how you collect them, how you do it. And you have to do it in such a way that you do not put a cost in terms of efficiency. That's the only problem, because otherwise investment is not going to move in a very flexible and open direction. Now, who is going to do that? Which is, what is going to be the institutional arrangement? As I said at the beginning, I think it is important. If you do not have a sectorial regulator that is going to do that, you have to send very strong signals to all government agencies to work in the same direction. So you cannot, or you should not, have different instructions to different agencies to have contradictory outcomes here. This is very important. So who is going to do it? This has to be defined in the secondary law, in the secondary legislation, but it has to be clear enough so that there is no contradiction between the decisions of the different agents if you have different agents, or the regulator if you have one regulator. Let me move to the second one, which is the relationship between the Mexican state and the private parties, or the new parties in this market. As I said, why you need this? Well, in order to have effective competition, you have to have a direct communication between the new participants and the state, not through Pemex, as I was saying. That's going to benefit efficiency. How do you do that? Well, either concessions or contracts regarding of what's the decision in the Congress, they should be awarded by the state. They shouldn't be awarded by Pemex. I mean, especially if it's a contract. If it's a concession, by definition, will have to be awarded by the state. But if it's a contract, the contract has to be with the state, not with Pemex, to maintain the incentives or to eliminate the incentives of Pemex to maintain market power. This is obvious. And who is going to do this? Well, this should be done by a regulator, but the regulator has to be independent. This is very important because the regulator has to be completely separated from political decisions. This is why you need independence. You need this independence in the sense that this has to be done by technical people, not by political players here. So this is very important. So now let me go to the third one, to the third one, which is the relationship between Pemex and the state, and the Mexican state. That has to be defined under the principle of competitive neutrality, as I said at the beginning. So the development of efficient markets needs that all players have exactly the same opportunity, the same possibility to grow and to be successful in this market. This is important. How you do that? Those principles of competitive neutrality will have to be spelled out directly and very clearly in the secondary law. That is how. Who? Again, the independent sectoral regulator is the one that has to apply those rules. So you will have a referee that will have to ensure that those rules are clearly and technically well applied. And finally, the relationship between Pemex and the new players. This is very important. And there, as I said, is what you need is a very strong antitrust authority, basically defining through enforcement the rules of the relationship between these two players. So that's the who. That's going to be who is going to be the new competition, the new competition authority that is already completely independent. How you are going to do it? Well, through enforcement of horizontal competition rules. You already have a very good competition law, as I said, in Mexico. And why? Well, you have to cut the history here. The history in which Pemex has been the real player, the only player in this market. And this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be easy to obtain or to do. This is very, very important. And let me finish before we go to the questions, and I hope there will be also answers. Let me move on the. I mean, I'm not a politician, but let me just share with you some concerns that I have. And those are very obvious if you read Mexican papers, and if you read even the international press, you will see this all the time, especially on Mexican papers. The international press, in some cases, some moments, they touch upon these issues. There are three problems if we want to see a successful reform in the energy sector in Mexico. Just to leave it simple. There are many more, but just to leave this issue as simple as possible. The first is the position of the public opinion. The second one is the powerful vested interest that we have here, as we normally have in different sectors, but in this sector is especially important because of history, because of the expropriation of oil in Mexico many years ago. And third, we have the everyday, and I say every day because this is something that I had seen every day during 9 years, asymmetry of information between economic interests and the society in general. This is a basic issue of political economy in any sector, but here is especially important. The public opinion, in general, the Mexican society has, in this kind of reforms, normally has a lot of doubts. And frankly speaking, it is obvious why they have doubts. We have gone in the last 20 years through different processes of privatization. And when you see the end result, I mean, you don't feel very comfortable by what we have obtained, frankly, just to say the least. No? And I'm telling you this from what I have been doing for me. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to give responsibilities to anyone else. I have been part of the government, even during those processes. I was not precisely in the privatization process, but I was part of the government, and I have to take responsibilities as well. So I'm not trying to put this in someone's minds, or I have been part of that. I had different expectations, that's true, but I have been part of that, and I have to take that responsibility myself. But let's take the privatization of airports in Mexico. Mexican airports are one of the most expensive airports. Just nominally, if you adjust by quality, they are even more expensive. I mean, we would like, when you compare the prices of, one of the most expensive airports is I think it's one of the Canadian airports. I don't know if it's Toronto. But you know, when you compare the quality of the Toronto export or the quality of Heathrow or Charles de Gaulle or Frankfurt, I mean, there is no comparison. But the problem was in the airport privatization process that the main objective of the government, which has been the case in many other privatizations, was to obtain as much money as possible. And if you do that, of course, you are going to be willing to basically maintain the status quo in terms of competition in that sector. So you are going to try to give them a monopoly and to work as a monopoly as it used to be when it was in the government. That has been the case of telecom. That has been the case of many other sectors in transport, in the financial services. So the new concessionaries pay a lot of money, and they have to get a lot of money from consumers in order to receive the money that they paid for. And that has been a problem. So when you ask the Mexican society, of course, they are very concerned. They say, come on, they are going to do the same thing again. So why should we accept this? So, you know, I'm not justifying that, but I'm just trying to understand what is the reason of why they have that position. Second, vested interest, very powerful. Yes, very powerful. In any monopoly, normally you have a very strong union. Because normally workers understand that they are offering services for a company that is obtaining rents. So if that company obtains rents, which are profits, much higher profits than the normal profits that you will have in a competitive markets, if they are obtaining rent, why shouldn't they share those rents with me if I am working for them? I mean, that's obvious. And normally the monopoly says, well, why not? I will share part of them. In the case of the Mexican monopoly in Pemex or the energy sector, not only Pemex, also the monopoly, well, that's another monopoly as well, of course. The union is very powerful as well. So they say, why should there be competition here? If there is competition, I'm going to receive less money. I'm not going to be able to receive that much amount of rents. So why should I support this? There is no reason to do it. And not only that, there are many economic agents that are playing and getting a lot of money working with Pemex as it works now, as it is now. Why should they open the possibility, or they accept the possibility to open this market to other players and to compete? So there are many, the point is that there are many powers that are against this reform, because they lose money. And the problem of asymmetry of information, this happens everywhere. Who is the one that has the greatest incentives to have all the information of what is going on in this game, in the Congress and in the executive branch. I mean, just the vested interest groups. Who are the others? The other side of the society are all Mexicans. And the public in general gains a smaller amount of money of this reform compared with the amount of money that is lost by the vested, very, very powerful interests that are quite connected on this, with this game and with the status quo. So there is a big asymmetry of information in this game. And this is obvious, and this is everywhere. This is in all sectors, especially in all those sectors where reform is taking place. So basically, what this slide tells me is, this game has not ended, and we will see a lot of political pressures in this game until it finishes. A lot of them, and especially with the fact that we have a pact which has been, as I said, the cartel that has been very positive in terms of getting results of reforms, of economic reforms in Mexico, to get together all the three biggest political parties. I mean, you could lose one of those parties here. And when you are in the middle, in the Congress, in the middle of the negotiation, as I said, of the secondary law of telecoms, of the secondary law of competition, of the financial sector reform, this reform, the fiscal reform, and some other reforms which are important, the anti-corruption, the form of the anti-corruption regulator, the transparency reform. So there are many others there. In the middle of this much bigger game, you never know what kind of trade-offs are going to be moved from one side to the other. So, and we shouldn't forget that. So let me stop here, and let me thank you very much, not only for the invitation, but the possibility to stay here for such a long time. Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, Eduardo. Thank you for those extraordinary insights. And of course, you can always look to the American Congress for an example of how partisan politics will be overcome for the greater good of the country. For questions for Eduardo, because we are recording this, please come up to one of the microphones in the aisle with your questions for Eduardo, making sure that your question is in the form of a question and rather than a comment.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, Eduardo. Pablo Medina from Wood Mackenzie. My question is, based on previous experiences from the AMP in Brazil, the ANH in Colombia, or even the Norwegian Directorate, do you think that the Mexican CNH should have a constitutional autonomy? Because that has been an issue that has been raised in terms of is it really autonomous or not. So what do you think on that?
Sorry, what you mean the competition authority?
Like the CNH, the regulator, should it have constitutional autonomy?
No. Well, this is a very, very interesting, and I think it's a very good question. How do you get autonomy? You can get autonomy by reforming the Constitution. So you can have constitutionally autonomous and constitutionally independent. But you can have that with an institutional design that is very much related or very much or a lot of too close to the executive branch and or to the legislative branch. You can have the opposite. You can have a very well-designed institution that is independent. What is the meaning of very well-designed? Let me just tell you an example. I mean, you can have, let's say, a group of 5 or 7 commissioners that form that institution, the ones that take decisions. And those commissioners could have long periods of appointments, and they can have a staggering when I say long, longer than the political periods. And staggering in terms of, means that you won't have any administration being able to name, to appoint all those commissioners. So that gives a lot of independence. I mean, that's what happens in the Federal Trade Commission. And that was the way it was designed, the competition authority where I was working. So now, the best, in my view, is to have a good design and, just to be sure, a constitutional autonomy. That has been the way the Mexican Central Bank has been working, and it's working very well. Let me tell you that this is one of the reasons why in the last few decades, not many decades anyway, but in the last few decades, we have not had any major crisis originated by macroeconomic instability. So that's important. So the best is to have both, to have a good design plus the constitutional element. The constitutional element is not enough, might not be enough. This is important. I mean, if you take the Federal Trade Commission here, as I was saying, it has a very good design. It doesn't have a constitutional autonomy, but maybe it doesn't need it. And it depends a lot. Very much depends on the culture, the political culture of the country. I remember a discussion like this one, the one that we are having now, in a meeting that I had in the OECD with other competition authorities. And I remember I was advocating for independence, technical independence and so on. And I remember the head of the Swedish authority basically saying, well, I mean, why are you putting so much emphasis in that? I mean, that's not necessary. Well, in Sweden, maybe not. In Mexico, you need even more.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Pickrell. I'm from the Houston Chronicle, and sorry. My question has to do with timing, both in terms of how long you might expect it to take to develop the secondary laws, and also whether international companies that would be interested in investing, if they've indicated whether they would need to wait for that before beginning investment, or any idea in timing for that as well.
Yeah, well, this is also an important issue, an important question. For me, it's very difficult to say this is going to be the fatal date, the final fatal date to have the result here. My impression is that the reform at the constitutional level is going to take place. It is likely to take place during this ordinary period of sessions of the Congress. That means this year, basically, until December. Sometime from now until December, I think it's going to go through. I think it's not too optimistic to think that will happen. But then you have to go to the secondary law. And as I said, this is crucial. The secondary law is going to be crucial. My impression is that there are possibilities to have the secondary law in the first ordinary session of the Congress at the beginning of the next year, in the next, in the few 3 or 4 months of the next. I think it finishes in. It must start in February and it will finish in April. And I think, given that you have so many elements in the Congress now, you need to start getting results, because otherwise you are going to lose momentum. That's one thing. But the other thing, which is very important, is in 2015 we are going to have a general election in Mexico, and we are going to change the whole Congress. I mean, the lower chamber. The complete lower chamber, at the federal level, of course. I mean, you need to have the economy running at that time. And that connects with your second question. Frankly, I cannot imagine Let me put it more clearly. If I had the money to invest in this sector, I would never do it until I see the secondary law very well crafted and already approved, frankly speaking. I wouldn't take any risk. And I don't see why anybody would take any risk before. I mean, there are not going to be even the opportunities in many sectors if you don't have the secondary law already in place. Now, being said that, it is important to be ready to be present very soon. As long as that happens, you have to be very fast to put your investments in Mexico, because that would increase the possibility to have a greater benefits. It's much better to be the first. And we will have to take some risks, that's true, once the secondary law is already there. Yes, thank you. Sorry, should we move sides or
Yes,
one
please.
and then, okay,
Yes,
please.
I'm Christina Gerard, and I just wanted to know who is the owner or organizer of Pemex right now?
Sorry, could you, I just
Who
couldn't hear.
is running or the owner of Pemex right now?
Who is running Pemex right now? Well, no, well, the institutional answer to that question is Emilio Lozoya. I mean, but that's the institutional answer.
What?
I would say that Pemex it has a lot of, I mean, the vested interest that have a lot, or that has a lot of interest in running parts of Pemex is the union.
And the union?
The union.
Yes, and
Yeah.
the union?
It has a lot of influence. I mean, Pemex is formally run by the Director General, but the union is having a lot of influence in the decisions of the decisions of the company. Of
And then
course.
who's running the union?
Sorry?
Who's running the union?
Well, I don't know. What I can see is the head of the union, the one that is running the union.
It seems like the government is already.
Well, I don't have
Pemex.
any more information than the fact that the head of the union is the one that is running the union.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Should we?
Hi, I'm George Baker. I publish a newsletter on the Mexican oil industry, and you helped me with a report that I'm struggling with, and I appreciate your comments. I'd like to build on the first question asked by Pablo about the future of the Hydrocarbons Commission. You said, I think rightly, that there needs to be a strong regulator that's separate from politics. In Mexico, there's a discussion going on that there should be one authority to issue awards of blocks and another authority to regulate the license holders who gain those blocks. So I'd like your opinion as to the future of the Hydrocarbons Commission, which currently exists only to regulate Pemex. So to do either one of those two functions, its mandate would have to be changed. So I'd be interested in how you see whether you need one regulator or two, and what's the specific future of the Hydrocarbons Commission as you see it.
That's a very interesting point as well. You know, my impression, that this is just my personal impression on this issue. Given the market structure that you have today, it makes sense to have, at least from the paper point of view, from the legal point of view, it makes sense to have the Hydrocarbon Commission taking care of many decisions of Pemex. I mean, the Director General to have the obligation to go through the commission in many of the decisions in Pemex. If you imagine a different a very different setting in this market, a very different market structure, where Pemex is one of the players, and you have some other players. I mean, I think and if the regulation comes from outside, from the Mexican state, could be through an independent regulator that is a regulator not within Pemex. It's a regulator that regulates Pemex and the private parties as well. I think it makes much more sense to have that setting, that institutional setting, instead of having the commission within Pemex, the hydrocarbons commission within Pemex. I think you could have an external regulator dealing with Pemex plus the other players, and that has to be outside. So the point is that the actual situation, I think, is explained by the actual structure of that market, where you have one player, which is Pemex, and that's it. And you need, it's very, actually, in this circumstance, is very difficult. It's very difficult to regulate Pemex, because Pemex becomes a very strange actor here. It's not private, it's a government-owned, but it's not the government itself. And how can you regulate such a big player there? I mean, you have the Commission of Energy. It's called the Federal Commission of Energy, and then you have the Hydrocarbons Commission that was created in 2008. One is an external regulator, but that external regulator, frankly, does not have much power. Now you have to move to a complete independent and very powerful regulator that deals with the relationship between the state and all the players in this new sector.
So you would say the Hydrocarbon Commission would not be that agency. You need a new agency to do that. Is that correct?
I would say so. Yes.
Let me ask you, in the interest of time, since you're no longer the government, that we have short answers as well as short questions,
Sure.
and invite everybody to join my students across the plaza in room 317 when we're through here.
I will try to comply, of course.
I'm Dylan McNally. I'm from the Mexico Center at the Baker Institute. Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. Another aspect of Mexican society that could perhaps use reform is the federal judiciary. Even if energy reforms pass in an ideal fashion, with constitutional reforms, contract, and maybe even concessions, do you think the powerful Pemex bureaucracy will try to impede reforms through the relatively, feeble judiciary systems? And if so, how can a successful reform bill perhaps anticipate these challenges?
Let me ask if you would join us across for that one.
Oh,
that actually is much
no
more
problem.
related to our class. If you would let us do that.
Will do.
And I will be happy to answer there as well.
Yes, Jim Tucker, consulting geologist. Appreciate your very comprehensive view of a lot of the context that we don't hear about for this sort of topic. Over the past 4 decades or so, production sharing contracts for the exploration production, the most upstream part of the petroleum industry, have been increasingly common. And for those, the ownership of the resource remains with the host government, and then, until there's revenue, there's really no commercial sharing from the outside partners, and also allows for participation, if desired, by national company of the host country. Can you see any impediment before any constitutional modifications in using contracts of these sorts, particularly if they were in areas that haven't been pursued or attractive to Pemex, such as Deepwater Gulf of Mexico or the extension of the Eagle Ford Trend into Tamaulipas, given that many of the traditional areas, commercial companies may feel at a disadvantage on an information basis for those that have...
Yeah, that's also that's also a very interesting question. I frankly do not see that possibility without changing the Constitution. I mean, it could be done the way it is done today, with incentivated contracts and so on. But then your relationship is going to be always with Pemex. And if your relationship is with your competitor, you depend on your competitor to have those contracts. I mean, I don't think you have the right incentives there. I don't think you have the right incentive structure of incentives to have a much more efficient system. So, frankly speaking, my opinion is that it should be done. If you're going to do it changing the Constitution first, and then having a very clear, a very well done secondary law. My preference, very personally speaking, well, there is no other way to speak, but personally, my preference is to have concessions. I think it's cleaner, it's easier. It's something similar to what we were discussing before when I was comparing the Swedish authority with the Mexican authority. It's not a problem only of principles or if that is possible or feasible. It's just an issue of what kind of society you have dealing with this issue. So it's better to go as farthest as possible. If you are going to make a major reform, do it completely.
And now for our last and very best question of the night.
I hope so. Ixiel Castro, also from Wood Mackenzie. In order to achieve the competition that you're talking about, neither Pemex or CFE will be able to survive as this integrated vertical companies as they are right now. But there's not a lot of discussion of how the unbundling process will work, especially for the power sector. Any lessons, any challenges ahead, any lessons from the past that we might hear from your ears?
Well, frankly speaking, I don't see. Well, let me see if I have your question clear. You basically let's tell me. You are basically asking if in the next future, with the Pemex playing in a level playing field with other parties there that could be more efficient and having pressure for Pemex to become a really efficient company, if that company is going to survive, is that your question?
Let's put CFE as an example, and I promise I'll do it very shortly. So what the government has said is that we're not going to sell any of the assets that we have right now to the private companies, but what we're going to do is we're going to break down CFE, and we're just going to have one company that is going to do only generation, another one is going to do only transmission, another one is going to be only in charge of the dispatch to the transmission lines, etc. But nobody has said exactly how that process is going to work, how are these independent, smaller companies are going to be structured, and also who's going to be the authority that's going to be controlling all the process to make sure that they actually end up being a more efficient way of dealing with the energy, with the power generation in Mexico.
Yeah, well, let me. Few months ago, when I was still in the competition authority, we decided to make an analysis of how you could reform the electricity sector without changing the Constitution. Something related to what you were asking in the other side of the energy. I had the impression, and we made this study there, that if you cut vertically the CFE, and you basically, I mean, today you can have private companies producing energy, but the only problem is that they have the obligation to sell that energy to the CFE, who is the only one that can make the transmission and the final distribution of that energy. And obviously, if the CFE has the possibility to discriminate against its own, could be inefficient plants, and in the end, that's going to be paid by the taxpayers. Why not they should do it. So it's just a matter of how you can define the structure of incentives that they are obliged to buy the energy to the most efficient producer. So in that sense, you can reduce subsidies and you can reduce the final price of consumers even without changing the Constitution. Now, if you change the Constitution and you make a much efficient set of production players there, and you allow them to reach the consumer directly and to sell directly that energy, I mean, you are going to have a much more efficient system. So I have the impression that changing the Constitution is you generate the sources of a much efficient and more competitive energy market.
And let me invite you to join us, and anyone else who'd like to follow this up. Across the plaza, room 317 on the 3rd floor, there are elevators and there are stairs. And join me in thanking Erica for arranging this, and thank you, Eduardo, for sharing his extraordinary insight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.